This is a demo of the gateway functionality within JSON Studio. The gateway is a sort of a middleware that allows you to separate between the builder of the queries in the pipelines and the invoker of the queries in the pipelines. So the first thing I'm going to do in this demo is build a new query. So I will log in into the JSON Studio. And I'll bring up the collection, which I will use to build the query. And this is a collection of projects from the World Bank. And what I want to do is I want to generate an API that returns the countries and the amounts spent, and I want to be able to call it from the outside. So the first thing that I'll do is I will create a new query. The query will get a parameter. The parameter will be the continent, and I will return all of the countries and the amounts spent. And I'll show you another piece of functionality, which is subqueries and bind variables through this example. So the initial part of the query is I'm going to use a subquery, which is something that Mongo doesn't really support, but using two phases, JSON Studio can support. So I'm going to double click on the country short name, and it brings me back a syntax which allows me to create a subquery. So my subquery is going to be lookup in the GDP collection. I'm going to use the continent query, and I will get back the country name. Okay, so if I run this, what I get back is really a set of documents. These are all the documents where the country is in Asia. So for example, if I switch this and I change this to Europe and run it again, then you'll see that now it's a Republic of Armenia instead of what it was before. So that's an example of what a subquery is. Now I'll show you another unique feature of JSON Studio, and that's the bind variable. So instead of putting in a value for Europe every time, or Asia, or Africa, etc., I'll put a bind variable. So I'll call it country, or sorry, continent. Okay, and continent gets a value that I bind at a later phase. So for example, if I open the bind variable pop-up, and I change this to, say, Asia, and run the query, then you'll see I'm getting Kingdom of Cambodia. If I change it to Americas, I get the Argentine Republic. So what's happening here, I have a query. The query has a bind variable, and then I bind the value that I want the query to run with from either the GUI or, as you'll see later, from the UI. And in order for the API to be easy to use, really what I want is only the country and the amount spent. Therefore, I will Alt double click the country short name, and Alt double click the amount spent. So that's somewhere down here, the total amount and the total commit amount. And if I want to see how this looks in a tabular format, I just click this here, and I get a tabular display of my countries. And by the way, I can bind things over here, so I can bind it now to Asia and rerun it, and I get all the Asian countries and the projects of the World Bank over there. So I'm almost done with this phase. Then the last thing I want to do is I want to save this search as. Okay, so let's save this search as search1. Okay, so I save it. And once I've saved it, now I can bring up, I'll show you the call of the API from another browser, although the API is just an HTTP-based API, so you can use a get, a post from a browser, you can use curl, you can use any command line, you can use any library within any language to make a call. So what I'm doing, you can see, I'm calling the gateway. Okay, I'm telling it which collection I want to run it on. I'm giving the name. What was the name that I used? Search 1. Okay, so I'm going to put in search 1. This is the saved query. The type, it's a find, because you can either run a find or an aggregation. And you'll see at the end, I give the credentials, and I also give the binding of the value for the continent. So this is my bind variable, so I give it a certain value. Let me run it. No such saved query. Oh, because I put in search instead of search 1. Let me add the 1, and here we go. So now I get my JSON data. I can change this. I can call it with the Asian countries. I can get it as a JSON, or I can get it if I add output equals CSV. That's another parameter it knows. Then it will return it as a CSV. And so what I've done is every single query that a developer or a designer creates within JSON Studio can now be opened up as an API that can be called from any other application or from users, etc. So this was a very short demo of the gateway functionality within JSON Studio. JSON Studio is a suite of applications that allow you easy and simple data access for all your users to data stored in MongoDB. Thanks.